Your Eminencies, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to bid you welcome to the 7th sessions. The speakers are Chrysanthos Papapostolou, Archim Moderator, from Holy Archdiocese of Athens, Church of St. George Halandri, Director at the Institute of the Archdiocese of Athens, and special partner of the Ecumenical Patriarchate network for pastoral care in the field of health. He'll talk to us and elaborate on the topic of ministering to those that are on the periphery of life. The second speaker is Mrs. Athina Marouda-Hatzouli, Assistant Professor of Psychology at the Department of Communication and Mass Media at the University of Athens, psychotherapist, group analyst, and she'll talk to us about living in the margins and the need to belong somewhere. We'd like to kindly ask Father Chrysanthos to take the floor. Thank you. Your Eminencies, Your Graces, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, participants, last February, by permission of the Metropolitan of Iliarchanes and Petropolis, Mr. Athinagoras, a group of 4 priests from the Archdiocese of Athens embarked on a series of weekly visits to the juvenile penitentiary in Avlonas, Attikis. This action was planned and was implemented under the auspices of the Foundation for Youth and the Family of the Archdiocese, the Holy Archdiocese, aiming at the psychological support of young people in prisons. There we have about 200 to 150 prisoners aged 17 to 22, mainly Greek people, but also people from different countries and different religions. The initial idea was that we could have 2 hours visits paid every week. Let me say that the chapel was consecrated by Metropolitan Paul 13 years ago. So in the venue of the church, during the break time at the prison yard for the prisoners, one priest would talk to the group of young people who would have gathered there, and the other priest would have individual sessions with any youth that would wish to spend with a priest some time alone. Here I'd like to say that our aim was not to help prisoners confess. This, of course, had not been forbidden to us, because confession and Mass were reserved for other days and hours, and they were the duty of priests of the Ilian metropolis. Our aim was to be there merely to offer advice. We didn't want to connect our presence with the provision of any material help, and that is why during our first visits we didn't even have a small treat to give the prisoners. Before we started our visits, we had a meeting with 2 of the psychologists from GEFEA, which is the Addicts Rehabilitation Center, that have group sessions for rehabilitation in prison. And we had several meetings with the social worker of the prisons, who gave us a lot of information regarding the place where we're going to take action. And among the many things we were told was that the children or young people we were going to meet have a long way to go in the penitentiary system, for this prison was not going to be their last, but their first. The stigma, the label of the delinquent, the outcast, the marginalized, the drug addict, the thief would be to follow them perhaps until the end of their lives. As we heard yesterday, many people grow up with myths. So according to some myths, you are told certain things that are not very nice or fancy. Pain, torments and wounds become the decoration in the lives of these children, when this is the only thing they hear during their childhood and when they grow up. Am I somebody? Am I somebody if I'm not in pain, if I do not nag, if I do not complain? Am I perhaps only pain and torment? Or is there something else behind the curtain of horror of mental pain? Do I have choices, or am I condemned to live my life from prison to prison? Most of the youths that approached us were Greek and foreign Roma children from different areas of Greece, and they had certain common features that I believe it would be worth our while to mention. None of them had gone to school, and if they had gone, they had not attended school for more than 3 or 4 years. The fathers of these young people whoever was alive, that is, had either abandoned them or were alcoholics or drug users. In their eyes, their mothers appeared to be a small saint or a heroine, irrespective of the fact that she might have been there many a time when they were being abused. The age difference with their parents was quite small, and they themselves kept there, even if they were 19 or 20 years old, had had at least 2 children, and their wives had left them for somebody else during the time of their detention. What I said above is only part of the information we got from discussing with them. It's not a product of a systematic scientific research. The meeting started with 5 or 6 people, and slowly and gradually the number grew, and we had the creation of a stable group of 8 or 9 young people that would come every Tuesday, and together with them another 40 that would not come every week, and some other people that merely entered the chapel. They lit a candle, they uttered a prayer, and they left. Some of them approached us in the hope that we were going to buy them prepaid phone cards, or we would deposit some money for them in the prison, or perhaps go to court and be their defense witnesses. Many were they who would come to us for us to read a prayer for them for a positive outcome for the trial, hoping and praying that the judge would be on a good day, but would believe that they had stolen something but not performed or committed a theft equally serious as the one they were tried for. Our meetings went on. Some young people didn't ask for anything at all. I shall never forget Marios, a Greek Russian youth who waited for everybody to leave, and as I was locking the door to the church, he asked me almost in tears. He said, "Father, could God actually forgive me, because when I was taking drugs I kept battering my mum." Or another prisoner, Vangelis, who said that I, Father, didn't know who God was. I came to know him here in prison, and thank God that I was imprisoned, because had I been out, I would have done far worse. Every Tuesday they wait for us, and they seek us. Their personal stories have deeply touched us. They come to tell us again and again how guilty they are for what they have done. They wish to turn back the hands of time and change it all, but we do know that if they go out and they go back to their homes, then most likely they'll do the same things again. Their family systems will remind them of the label they wore years ago, and they'll see to it that they never become different. A notable case in point is the story of 2 brothers, Raphael and Panagiotis. Children coming from a family with many members. Since the age of 8, they lived in institutions around the streets, and when they got 15, they started living in juvenile delinquents reformatories. The 2 older sisters were in prison, and the nearest person was a social worker. Every contact they had with family was a violent conflict. For all intents and purposes, however, they had the constant complaint of why their mum would not call them. "Why is not my mum calling me?" Raphael asked. But every time she calls him on the phone, he shuts himself in his cell, melancholic. Panagiotis, however, managed to get away of it all. He got out of it all. He found a job, but it only took a phone call from his mum to get him back to prison, to be there with his life imprisonment convict of a brother. There are invisible ropes that have tied these young people with their families, and it takes a very special effort and struggle to cut these invisible ropes in order to set limits for these young people to be able to escape the margins of society and to go higher. The limits and the care are 2 forgotten words that their lives never taught them, and society came to remind them in a very hard way. Before I proceed to some thoughts that I had regarding hope, I'd like to share with you the most overwhelming experience, in my opinion. I had the experience during the days of Easter, on Good Friday and Holy Saturday. The Mass of the Epitaph took place at noon of Good Friday. Some volunteers, ladies from Vionisos, Attiki, that had come to the prison chapel, had decorated the epitaph and had prepared the church together with the priest of Avlonas. After a brief deposition, we started chanting the epitaph encomium, and then the young people bore on their shoulders the epitaph, and it took us a little while before we got out to the prison corridors for the procession of the epitaph. Cement was everywhere. There were 2 empty goalposts and very tall walls sprayed with graffiti, tall walls full of barbed wires, like the barbed wires that hearts surround themselves with when they don't want to hurt anymore or connect to anyone. These young people felt as if they were carrying their own dead, a very close relative, somebody who knew what injustice was all about and what hurting was all about. What a shame and what a pity that there are some people whose sorrow is omnipresent. The next day, on Holy Saturday, we all went back to the church for the resurrection, and there people were quite moved. Some eyes were welled up in tears. However, the faces were smiling faces. They kept chanting, "Christ has resurrected," and they didn't want to let us go. Right after that, some young people came to confess. At some moments, indeed, the way in which some people open up to us leaves us speechless and ecstatic, and you truly think that it's worth your while and it's worth the fatigue, even if you're able to help one person that felt like kneeling before the Christ and ask for mercy, and has a witness to that the entirety of the church and the face of a priest. Throughout these months, I got a lot of hope from prison because I saw gazes change and I saw wild beasts become calm. On the other hand, however, I was quite concerned about the limit to what we call the periphery of life, the margin of life. Who lives on the periphery and who lives inside life? All these young people who are in prison, any other young people who take drugs, and the other ones who live a life of not accepting personal responsibility and never coming to age, have lived for a while or for a long time in one family. So if we truly decide to work looking to the future and envisaging the church and the society of people and persons that we really want to have, we shouldn't only have to work with young people, but mainly with a family or parents. Otherwise, we're bound to build and have everything collapse at the flick of an eye. Treatment and prevention can be based on nothing if we don't have values, if we don't have sources of personal strength, and not merely a soul that is mentally robust. The most effective structure to teach a value or an idea is the family. We haven't been able to find a more efficient teacher. The church, of course, has a lot to say and give, but we need a fertile ground for everything to bloom. When we travel by air, the air stewards give us instructions and say that in case of decompression, masks will drop automatically before us, and when the parent wears the masks, then they help the child. If the parent has fainted, they cannot minister to themselves or their children. The same thing is true with all care relations. Besides, the patriarchal network has always been an effort to care for the caregivers. Hope is directly related to a person's network of support. If one grows up in a family system where this support network exists, then this person tackles the difficulties of life in an entirely different manner. The presence of the priest in a prison or anywhere, any other venue accommodating people with traumatizing early life experience, aims at instilling hope in people, not through a very strict theological sermon, but through an experience that will repair. If I am detached, incomprehensible, if I do not adjust, if I'm unapproachable, if I'm indefinite, indifferent, merciless, then however can I possibly repair? I'll be like the father of these children. All these children had their caregivers abandon them or abuse them. Are we to do the same? Something else that we also need to bear in mind when we approach people who struggle for change is to have in mind that perhaps it's one thing for them to want to change as they want to change, and another thing what we think of their change. Sometimes it is as if we want to extricate them from the periphery and put them in another margin. That is why it is of utmost importance to investigate their needs and know precisely what they want and what we can offer. What we have to say should be translated into the language they understand for them to either accept or reject. Your Eminencies, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, participants to the conference, I trust that all of you have a lot of cases to contribute concerning the pastoral care of people whose lives deprive them of everything or give them everything. Too little is not easily tolerated. Too much, again. Times change, time flies, and people remain thirsty for society and life. If you happen to encounter somebody who, according to your criteria, lives in the periphery of life, please stop, look at them, and think, what do I have in common with the person before me? If you do not find something in common, then go and confess immediately. If you do find, however, even one little modicum of common, then you will have started a connection, and then there will be hope for you, for them, for all of us. Thank you.
We thank Father Chrysanthos for sharing his experience with us. Now we shall ask Madame Athina to take the floor. Thank you very much. To begin with, I should like to thank the organizing committee, the coordination committee of the conference, the coordinator in charge, His Reverence Stavros Kofinas, for inviting me to address a conference which I think is a conference of great importance for life and human beings. My topic shall discuss the idea of living in the margins and the need of belonging, an effort perhaps to give an answer to these questions. What links us to people who are marginalized? Perhaps the need to belong. So the paradox of belonging is my topic.
Ευχαριστώ. Το ανήκειν και το παράδοξο του ανήκειν, την τραυματική.
The traumatic experience of people on the sidelines who cannot belong, who are not able to belong, and psychological and physical consequences of the need to belong not being satisfied. Also, the inability of developing psychosocial identity for people who are, in a sense, psychosocially disabled, and how to develop resilience through belonging groups. This is the outcome of my experience with students who want to get out of the sidelines by creating their own belonging groups, and also as a psychotherapist who has worked with stigmatized people, with people suffering from mental pain, people who are different, people who are marginalized. So what I want to maintain is that there is a clear connection between the inherent need of human beings to belong to a group or to a relationship with the phenomenon of marginalization and the development of identity in people to develop their resilience. Also, that the link to belonging groups can help marginalized people to develop their resilience vis-à-vis experiences gained in life as a sort of collective struggle. There have been several surveys that have demonstrated that when the need is not fulfilled, then there will be consequences such as inability to form bonds, insecurity, envy and jealousy, isolation, high feelings of guilt, development or rather lack of development of a psychosocial identity and self-determination, and various coping mechanisms which parallel the kind of feelings experienced by people who live in the margins. Who is in the sidelines? Who is marginalized? Are the questions that arise. The homeless, refugees, immigrants, disabled people, people who suffer from mental disorders, and lesbians, homosexuals, bisexuals, transsexuals, transgender, and other groups. These are all groups of people who might choose to live on the sidelines or who are marginalized because of their difference. Each of those groups have their own hallmarks, such as, and we've seen that in extensive surveys, an emotional isolation, solitariness, along with low self-regard, feeling humiliated, feeling degraded or stigmatized, such as with the homeless, or feeling shut off, suicidal, depressive, helplessness, shame, and hopelessness. In some of those groups, the lack of social or family support can lead to the inability to develop a healthy identity, both individually and socially. Stigmatization of people on the sidelines goes along with marginalization, and therefore puts a stigma on the identities of people in the margins, and determine the process of gaining an identity intrapersonally and transpersonally, individually and social. Extensive surveys in social psychology have shown that people who are in the margins or feel in the margins, either in the inner or in the outer group, feel they have been rejected and that they are not liked or accepted by other members of the groups, of the group, or the groups to which they believe they belong. And so they are impelled to quit the group. It's the black sheep syndrome. Socially, one considers it worse to be unliked in a group than to belong, than not to belong to the desirable group, the group they want to join. Social identity, which is determined and indicated by how we relate to the other, determine the basic human experience of who I am and where do I belong. They impart a feeling of the continuity and integration of the person with the group to which they belong. Contrariwise, the individuals in marginalized societal groups constitute a degraded sense of self, according to the diminished manner in which they perceive the relationship to other people and how they are dealt with. And that leads to psychosocial disability, which is a concomitant of stigmatization and associated affects. So, in conclusion, as is maintained by most of those surveys on exclusion and marginalization, interpersonal relations and the development of the individual in groups and relationships constitute the necessary condition for good quality of life. Being in touch with people, being close to people, to the other, are perhaps the most challenging and demanding project, given how the need for the other and companionship is so desirable and so conflictual, so that when it arises, it can reduce the manifest feelings of stigmatization and marginalization. Now, what is the need of the other? How can we identify it and get to know it? It's some basic affects for attachment and affiliation which the person needs. Freud speaks of the need of belonging as part of the need that everyone has to be loved and to exist in harmony with other people. I am quoting what some people said in a seminar on belonging. So one said, I have the sense of belonging when I have the experience of the other who can contain me in the personal space where I can share what I feel, where my personal individual experiences can be appreciated and be respected, and when I have the right, I enjoy the right of being myself before the other. Space will not contain me, nor will it shape me one way or another. It supplies me with an environment in which I can exist and grow. There are many theorists who have investigated the need of belonging, such as Baumeister and Leary. Through an existential analysis, they maintain that the need of belonging is a basic and widespread human urge to create positive interpersonal relations. It's a cry for existing. Representatives of the school of object relations, such as Fabrain, Winnicott, and Klein, as well as Bowlby, emphasize that individuals as social beings need other people. Fuchs also, a group therapist, has said that belonging is fundamental to motivating human behavior. And he ascribed the need of belonging to the coexistence of a social instinct found in people, even in the most asocial or antisocial individuals. Even there, one discerns desire to belong. In other words, human beings are a social animal. That is indicative of the need of human beings to belong to groups, be part of them. So, what's the role that can be played by integration groups, solidarity groups, mutual help groups, such as the groups that we heard speak of earlier in times of crisis, in times of cultural upheaval? Several scholars have referred to the importance of such groups in deflecting the agony, the anxiety, the insecurity that is born of times of crisis. And the idea is that those groups can contain the anxiety and worry of those people and offer hope through the space that allows for acquainting oneself with the other and of dealing with one's own desires and perceived deficiencies in an individual and group setting. There have been many scholars who have spoke of the importance of belonging in enhancing self-image. The importance of those belonging groups is highlighted by many psychoanalysts and group therapists since they offer, as Bolas said, alternative belonging groups. Those can effect transformative and transitional functions for people who are trying to bridge the gap with the initial family group. They provide opportunities to idealize, to identify with impulses, and can also serve as links of the interior with the exterior world of the human being. So those belonging groups, we can readily see, can indeed convey hope to the individual and affect this connection and make them have a sense of not belonging to the margins, but of having a healthy concept of life. But the need to belong is also conflictual, intensely so, and oftentimes marginalized groups suffer this conflict. Do they want to be with the other, or do they prefer to be themselves? In one belonging group, let me speak of this paradox for a short time, the paradox of belonging, the intensity that is caused by the need to satisfy the wish to belong vis-a-vis the irritation at being with others. This is the paradox of this conflict. People in marginal groups, not just people in the sidelines, homeless or whatever, but the other types of marginalized groups that I spoke of. In one belonging group, Maria, the American as she called herself, was born and raised in America. When her parents decided to come back to Greece, she chose to follow them. When she was in the States, she said she felt proud to be Greek. She could attend the afternoon school at university. She was called the Greek. Once back in Greece, though they live exactly the way everyone else lives, in her homeland, she is Maria the American. Maria wanted to participate in a migrant group because she cannot establish relationships. She feels foreign. In another group, a Palestinian student belonging to the General Union of Palestinian Students in Greece said of the groups, "With Palestinians I feel at home. Every time one's with them, one feels that. We have the same food, the same memories, the same discussions you'd have at home." Now, these examples come from former experiential groups for self-knowledge and a pilot survey as to how minority group people will handle traumatic experiences of the past and collective traumas from establishing organizations and groups for belonging. In those instances, the belonging group is a sort of shield protecting them vis-a-vis exterior and interior pressures to identify with a new environment and the others around them, especially in the first months of integration in a new cultural environment. Individuals seem to feel a need for the group, to feel familiar, to work through new information, to make appraisals and compare and contrast and organize their interior and exterior environment. Furthermore, they can thus handle the chronic pain they feel for their separation from the country of origin. It is believed that groups for newcomers in a foreign multicultural environment respond to the need to belong. A transition from a cultural environment to a different one, either effected through choice or under pressure, would mean that there is a break in the bonds that might afford a feeling of security to people. So making up for this lack of security because of the broken bonds, the group will take the role of the primeval or primordial other, mother or nurse, and therefore act as such. Once the person becomes accepted in the group through sharing, they come out of their isolation, are socialized, and assume a social position wherein they feel safe and on equal standing with the other members of the group. As emphasized by subjects of this survey, the feeling of solidarity with fellow human beings and personal work performed for the common good can lead them back to the values of their own original groups and feelings of continuity and security. In this manner, belonging groups can offer a potential space for containment where the individual can experience the hope and possessed of the wherewithal to react and to renegotiate experiences and feelings. They belong to the social milieu, but at the same time they can differentiate themselves from it and therefore can feel harmoniously coexisting within and outside of the group. The ability to give the marginalized person the way of feeling and experiencing alterity is the way to deal with such issues. Thank you very much.